All right.
Here we go. Let me see. Oh, there we go. Gallery view. Da-da-da-da. We are side by side. We're finally here again. Yay! Terry doing your little dance. So I am setting the timer because we missed last week. We might go a little bit longer than what we did before, but it's still good for us to kind of keep track of where we are. So, sitting start.
I just want to thank you guys for your flexibility on that. The reason that we were late last week is because I was having some hard times with my dad. If you listen to our podcast, you know that he's had a series of falls. And so we're going back and forth on where do you put the crazy old man who is my father, who keeps wanting to stand up and fall because he doesn't remember that he can't stand up. So I appreciate your thoughts, prayers, chakra bursts, anything,
good vibes, all
white
that stuff.
lights, anything that that is helpful. Just good energy is great. We're going to be moving him again this week. So again, thoughts and prayers.
Again. Yeah, we're with you, Terry.
Thank you.
So since we missed last week, we could talk a little bit about last week's episode, but we got a lot to talk about for this next one, right? So it was so good. So but before we go into our absolute love for episode 5, let us think about episode 4 just a little bit. So The Company We Keep was last week's episode. So what'd you think?
Okay.
You are terribly keen.
So I've got it written here. It says meh is what it says. After episode 3, which was so amazing.
Yeah.
Episode 5 happens and I was...
You mean episode 4?
I mean, episode 4 happens and I was... So they missed a great opportunity. I think, first of all, I don't know what the theme was. Nobody's really...
The Company We Keep, but yeah.
But
other than that.
It's not really alluded to.
No,
It
not
kind
really.
of all over the place. You've got this theme of true love. You've got this theme of community.
Yeah.
You've got this theme of loyalty. You've got this theme of, hey, can you even do this stuff that I just asked you to do?
Yeah.
And the whole Roger Jayme relationship. They really could have dug in there, and I think that would have been the place to fully dig in. This is kind of an odd section of the book. Okay.
Yeah.
You've got them going to Brownsville, and you don't really know what's going to happen there. And it's that whole story between the Beardsley trading post and Brownsville is an odd story. I keep waiting to come back to it in the books, actually. And we haven't really fully come back to that to kind of find out where that little girl ends up and how she's going to play out. But what they could have done with it in the television show is really turn it into a strong thematic piece. Instead, it was just plot.
Right.
All it was we went from here to here to here to here and to here to here to here. And I get that as far as moving story along, but there really needed to be a theme. And if I were the writer, and let me just say, I would like...
You're available?
I'm available. Because all I'm doing is sitting at home during a COVID-19 pandemic.
Sorry, we haven't even mentioned that.
So what could have happened here is there could have been a greater theme.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree. I think though there were some really good pieces in the last episode
Remind me.
A few quotes that I thought were just absolutely hilarious. So Beecham, Randall, Fraser, now Rawlings, you have another husband I should know about. That made me laugh. I was like, wow, that's really good. The relationship between Marsley and Bree, I thought, and the way in which Bree's kind of seeming paranoia, we know it's real, but no one else does, is this, I thought was shot really well. Particularly, so we talked about the episode 3 being shot by a horror person, and I saw saw some of that even with kind of Bree's like hunt for Jayme and that kind of stuff. So we know that that's real.
And that was great,
but no one
too.
else did. Yeah.
That was actually the best part of the whole show, I thought.
I'm trying to remember. So Marsley telling Bree that she killed her father in the sense of she prayed for him to die or to go away, and that he was arrested as a Jacobite and died in prison. Is that in the book? I don't remember that in the book.
I don't remember that either. We don't really get in depth into Marsley
and how she feels about her father.
No, well,
other than Jayme.
Yeah. We really don't get a lot of that.
Yeah, but I love kind of what's happening. I mean, we've already said this, but this episode 4, I think the development of Marsley as a character and her role in this wider story, I'm loving where they're going with her. I think it's really fantastic.
I agree.
Roger and Claire talking about Jamie's decision to send Roger back. He doesn't have any faith in me, and Claire says he just entrusted you with the one thing he loves most. Mm-hmm. That was full of grace for Claire, also true, but also aware of just how Roger's feeling.
Right. Well, and aware of Jamie's. So in the books as well as in the show, they don't show it as much in the show because it's more internal.
Yeah.
Jayme has an amazing ability to feel the politics of the moment and find an adequate solution that hits all the needs.
Yeah.
And that was one of them. He hit all the needs. And Claire pointed out the pieces that Roger missed.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's understandable that he would have missed those. But it was really, I think that was a really fantastic way of kind of doing that. So let's see, a couple other things that I thought. So Isaiah Morton calling Roger and Jayme out for their hypocrisy regarding love, becoming foolish for love. So
could have been an entire show about true love.
It could have. Yeah, it could have. That's true. But I think there is a theme. Well, there's been a theme that's going throughout the entire series, not just this season, but because it certainly comes up in the next one, so in episode 5. But there was something around adultery, betrayal, dishonor, and kind of wherever we are, we make choices and hope that the good outweighs the harm. Was kind of how episode 4 ended.
Yeah.
And this is certainly again kind of a theme that comes up in episode 5 of kind of these choices that we make and how they lead us onto a particular path. And it's a path that we can't necessarily see or expect that would have happened, but it's still, and we already have talked about kind of fate and free will and determinism and stuff in episode 3, and so
they could have like teased that out a little bit in that episode, and they totally didn't.
Yeah.
Like what I mean, the whole thing about this young woman, the baby, the little girl, that would have been a great setup for, we don't know, what she's going to be. What is was she meant to live? If we had not come along, if Claire had not been there, if all those things, that what does this do? What does this ripple effect do for the future with this woman now being taken care of?
Yeah.
I
I wonder though, how you know better than me around kind of screenwriting stuff as to how often you can bring that theme up without overdoing it.
Yes, you can.
Because if they've already done it in kind of episode 3 and now they've done it in episode 5, whether or not in episode 4 it would have been overkill, or do you just kind of need to every once in a while remind people where we're going or what we're talking about?
Here's the beauty of the way the writer did in episode 5, because at the end of episode 5 I got to hear the this is what we did and here's why. They actually shot it linearly. It was written linearly.
You mean episode 4 or episode 5?
Episode 5 was written linearly. Episode 4 is written linearly and it plays linearly. You don't get a whole lot of you don't get a whole lot of back and forth in time.
Yeah.
But
I don't think you get any really in 4, did you? Yeah. This is the first time we've seen Claire in 20th century Europe, or 20th century is episode 5, right?
Yeah, first time in this season.
We've done that. Yeah.
But we go back and forth in time. Even when you flash back to when she was in Boston, you go back and forth a little bit. That's not even told
you do. Yeah, that's true.
And so, but you don't get, you hear Claire musing and talking a lot in episode 5 about time, but you don't really get the whole kernel of that episode until the very last. You don't really get that whole kernel. And I agree with you. I think the whole season has built from the first 4 seasons to this one to really talk about how history changes. And that's kind of how the book is that you don't really get that full conversation. You get it in book 1 with her and the father, and you get
Father Anselm.
And you get some of that, but you really don't get it from a predestination perspective until you get to this, because then Roger's actually there with them going, hey, wait a minute, you can't change history.
Yeah, and you've got some Presbyterian presence, which you haven't had previously.
So you've got some determinism going on. But what they didn't do in 4 is they didn't really write. So there was a theme at the end. There was a theme having to do with loyalty, disloyalty, and being able to and it's stated. They state that theme, but what they didn't do was show it
all
prior to.
Yeah.
And so it's a little messy, it's a little all over the place, and it's more plot than theme. And it could have been both. They proved that they could do it in episode 3. They proved that they could do it in episode 4. They proved that they could do it in seasons 1, 2, and 3. And even in season 4, but they didn't do it in that one.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I agree. So, okay, so we're 10 minutes, 24 seconds in. Let's do episode 5. Okay, so the title is Perpetual Adoration. I adored it. It was, of course, we as Outlander Soul co-hosts are into the theology, the religion, the spirituality of the series, and it was chock full. So
much stuff.
So good.
Of all, it is in the book that this is what Claire does.
Yeah.
And she actually does it more often. So this is actually a daily spiritual practice for her. This is a not daily, but it is a spiritual practice for her because she's not really spiritual or deeply so. But this is the thing.
This is the thing she does. Yeah. Okay, so my one annoyance on this is that yes, they changed it. I'm sad that it changed her participation in the Perpetual Adoration is presented as a response to Graham Menzies' death rather than her own spirituality. And in the series, she is doing it because it's something she does, as opposed to, oh, I need to uphold this tradition that Graham Menzies had because so that I thought was a bit of a loss.
Yeah, and the difficulty with Graham Menzies' death in the book is a much more difficult thing than, oh, by the way, he had penicillin and he had, no, she actually gives him, so he has cancer.
Yeah, and she helps him die.
She gives him extra morphine.
Yeah.
And that's why she has to take a leave of absence from the hospital.
Yeah.
Now they combine the one person that she did know who on her watch got penicillin anaphylaxis, and they combine those two patients into one. Yeah. Which is not unusual for people adapting book or even adapting history. They will combine. Shakespeare did it all the time. They combine people into one.
Yeah.
And so, they missed an opportunity there, but they still used this one really, really
They did. And like I said, that's really the only one annoyance is we've really kind of spent some time sort of really looking at Claire's spirituality and, and this was an opportunity, I think, for them to really present her as someone who is quite contemplative and who is quite, she does this stuff on her own rather than kind of a reactive sort of situation.
Right.
But how they could have really told that in a realistic way, considering they haven't represented it in prior situations, like when other 20th century, shots. I don't know. But that was kind of like, oh.
I know, they could have. Or they could have even harkened back to her sitting with Father Anselm.
Yeah.
Just they could have had, a layered kind of effect there.
Well, because they had that little montage.
Yeah.
And there was a perfect opportunity for her beautiful. To be for that to also been included. And anyway. So, okay.
I love the
So
montage.
other than that, where do we start? Yeah.
I love the montage, but there was this one question: how many times have my prayers been answered?
Yeah. That was great.
That was
really
beautiful,
good.
because her prayers were answered. I mean, Jayme did live. She did make it back safe. Bree was born safely. She got to be with Bree. You know, all of her prayers. Yeah, she went through a lot of loss, but as in, because she's part of the greatest generation, as is their kind of the theme that kind of runs through the greatest generation is, but look at how lucky I am to be here.
Yeah.
And that's where, look at how many prayers that I have answered.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Meanwhile, you know, as me sitting there going, but how many of your prayers weren't? Yeah. And just kind of thinking as well about the people that I know who do pray constantly for something and it doesn't happen. And so for them, it is a God doesn't exist, because obviously if God exists, this would be taken care of, or people wouldn't suffer in this way, or whatever the case may be. And I think it implies that question without saying it, because we know she's suffered. We know she's lost a lot. We know that the people that she cares about have died. And so I thought it was done really well. But
it also implies the fact that, okay, so she is sitting there with a prayer unanswered at the adoration. It implies that God is not there for you to get your checklist of things done,
or our fairy godmother.
It implies that God is really present, and that you can choose to be in that presence, and that presence can choose to be with you. It implies more of a God that's presence than it is, because yes, her prayers are answered in this monologue. She's now talking from the 18th century with Jayme, with her daughter, and with her grandson. But at the time that she goes and speaks, she is still in the pain of losing Frank, and of still not being close with Brianna, and still thinking Jayme dead. So I think
and
that
20 years of suffering that she's really kind of gone through in that.
Well, and the fact that the priest is present with her, the fact that it was just a beautiful moment of God is just present.
Yeah, so I kind of started making notes. I mean, when she starts talking about who we think God is, which comes from the prologue of A Breath of Snow and Ashes. So they have skipped forward and taken some godly language, some theological sort of musings that Claire is making from A Breath of Snow and Ashes, and used them in this, which I thought was absolutely perfect. It does make me wonder, you know, like, okay, so how are we going to do A Breath of Snow and Ashes, provided we get the season, so we'll see. But so yeah, the prologue about, I've got it here in front of me, the time is a lot of things people say that God is. There's always the pre-existing and having no end, the notion of being all powerful, because nothing can stand against time, can it? Not mountains, not armies. And time is, of course, all healing. Give anything enough time and everything is taken care of. All pain encompassed, all hardship erased, all loss subsumed. So definitely
that's what she says
in the conversation around prayer as well. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Remember, man, that thou art dust, and unto dust thou shalt return. So if time is anything akin to God, I suppose that memory must be the devil. I have always loved that. I mean, of course, we could parse that out, and memory could be a bad or a good thing. But in the context of this, it's quite interesting that they've used it in this particular section.
Right.
So I have sat here going, oh my, who we think God is. Oh my God. They are really going there. This is fantastic.
They really did. They totally went there. And I was just so grateful. And so this was also beautiful.
Yeah.
Time is God's eternal web. The mildest touch setting it off, vibrations that echo through history. I was just like, oh, that's all the things. Is God the spider or just the spinner of the web? Awakening the real spiders in our own nature. We as the spiders, and God spinning the web for us. I mean, I was like, Wow.
Those are some serious theological concepts around how God works in the world, whether or not it's a deist idea, or where it's kind of like God is watchmaker and he's just kind of, or God's just kind of wound up the clock and then just let it go, or whether or not God is constantly sort of tinkering, and then the implications of that. If God is tinkering, then God has control, and then so when bad things happens, that means God has intervened in some way to make that happen, which then becomes really problematic. So I mean, this is kind of setting up a really rich kind of theological discussion about the role of God and how people think about God in the world, and whether or not history is sort of God's CV, as it were, of being involved, or whether God's completely absent or God doesn't exist at all. I mean, obviously this episode assumes that God does, but some people think that differently, and so well,
and it got Claire to think about things differently too, especially since she goes back in time. But what this does is it puts a personal face on what that history is. Definitely. It puts a personal face and it puts a personal story into this idea of destiny. Whereas it's not so epic, it's not Luke Skywalker and saving the whole universe. It's just Claire and saving that baby. It's just Claire and, giving them tonsillectomies, which, by the way, was brilliant.
Yeah.
The whole tonsillectomy scene was gross and all the things it was supposed to be, but it was brilliant. And
penicillin, eureka, which made me laugh, because eureka is a gold rush term which hasn't yet happened. And so Marcelly's like, eureka,
what does that mean? but I think that's part of what gives this episode such an emotional heart. Is that it beats this question all through without you actually knowing what the question is until the end. And I mean, you're wrapped in this story because you know what happens to Claire and you know what happens to Jayme, and yet we're still discovering that. We hadn't discovered this story. We're still discovering. So this is the way Diana writes too. You still discover little bits and pieces of Claire's past as we're getting the story, because she won't reveal that. She doesn't reveal all that Claire is.
No. And I think that's much more realistic, because we don't just kind of do this information dump of, here we all are, and every bit and piece we find out, we know about each other as we're in relationship, as I tell you a little bit more about myself, as as this
story applies to our lives going forward. Right.
So we are in relationship with Claire just like anybody else would be. So so one question I had, we'll certainly come back to the whole religious theme, but I was trying to remember, and I don't think it is in the books, but does Marcelly know that Claire's a time traveler?
No.
I didn't think so.
Later. So I think I know that she tells, so they tell everybody back in Scotland's in the last book, or in the second to the last book, Breath of Snow and Ashes, right? They tell everybody in Scotland. I don't know if they tell everybody at the Ridge.
Yeah, see, that's what I was trying to remember, how Claire's absence and all that got explained to Fergus, other than, I think she went to Boston and that was all. But I'm just thinking,
she goes to France.
She went to France and then she went to Boston or something.
And then she goes to Boston,
Yeah. But the just the absolute trust then that Marcelly's having toward Claire, who's introducing her to all of this stuff that, of course, well, she doesn't know, that not every other doctor knows. But I'm just sitting there going, wow, this is, I wonder if Marcelly's in on it. I don't think she is, but this is an interesting conversation. I think that they are going to need to have, actually, especially if things continue.
I don't know. So if they don't have it, like I don't believe they do in the books. I don't believe they have it in the books. But if they don't have it, that's an opportunity for conflict between the characters, an opportunity to grow the characters apart and create an angst. So we really love them together right now. But what if they were to break apart?
What's going to happen if they break apart? Especially if they go with Malva, or don't, like if this is some kind of play with the Malva conflict.
Right.
Yeah, the impetuous pirate, we got that, which I thought was fantastic too.
Abernathy comes back.
I know, it was so great. He was like, who'd you think put it in the doctor's office? Yeah. So, guess you really never know what's coming, do you? And then Claire says, no, we don't. Feels very apt. This entire episode actually felt really apt for where we are right now.
It felt like we were finally back with them. I felt like my family finally came back, and Claire had a connection to us, to the story, to Jayme that I haven't seen since episode 3. But there was a real connection with this. We got to see the breadth of it, but the heart of it too. And that's what I loved. The story of Roger and Bree in this. Yeah. Words have consequences.
Yeah. That was brilliant as well. And we see Roger again sort of do the runaway, which he's done before, right? So this is typical Roger behavior, but he came back a whole lot quicker this time.
Yes, and he's
learning.
He blames her for this thing, and that makes me angry that Roger does that, and makes her angry too. The moment she lifts her chin and looks at him, I'm like, good for you, Bree, because you really don't have to. No. This is something he doesn't get, and you need to not have to explain it so much to him. He doesn't need to be on board. And he comes back to her, realizing that it's not about him.
Yeah. So Roger's growing. We see that. I love Roger, so I'm glad they're doing him really well. I asked a question fairly early on, is it not common knowledge that Jayme's related to Myrta? Obviously it must not have been. Myrta's going by Fitzgibbons, not by Fraser, but that whole Knox conversation, that was kind of interesting. I don't know how I feel about Jayme having killed Knox.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that either. It kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, but I'm thinking what other choice does he have at this point? But the writers have set him up this way. There isn't really that instance in the novels that I recall, particularly this particular one. The way I remember this one is that there might have been a few injuries, but in this particular gathering of the militia, there was no real fight. They show up, they show strength, and then they all get to go home again. And so this was kind of a big poof kind of, it dissipates, which is you can do easily in a book, but not necessarily so much on a show. And so I think they had to, and honestly, I saw it kind of coming. I saw that this whole, back and forth was going to happen because they were building up this relationship so much. And it felt a little forced to me.
I mean, we could. So I'm sort of hearkening back to my misgivings about Myrta doing the tar and feathering, and so whether or not this is kind of consistent with Jayme's character or not. I think it is, and I think that's kind of what makes me uncomfortable about it. Is he is willing to do these kinds of things, but one thing we haven't talked about. Well, we didn't get a chance to last week, but there was somebody that commented on our YouTube video when Myrta was it was between two fires. So when Myrta did the tar and feathering, Sue Richardson wrote that she says, as much as I hated the tar and feathering and Myrta's smug approval of it, there is precedent for his violent streak. Season 1, he cuts the redcoat courier's throat pretty handily. The guy Jenny's been torturing, and while she and Claire were trying to find out where Jayme's been taken, so he does that. Dispatches the guy really quickly. Season 2, Myrta suggests that they're in Paris, that they just kill Bonnie Prince Charlie and be done with it. Later in season 2, he cuts off the Duke's head and lays it at Claire and Mary's feet.
But
Season 3, he's gleefully killing redcoats at Culloden. Murtagh is a pretty bloodthirsty, vengeful Scot. Having gotten to know loyal, sweet, sexy Murtagh makes it tough to see him as so hateful and spiteful. I like seeing that he's a fully rounded character, she says. But yeah, I thought, okay, yeah,
you're right.
Maybe he is capable of this.
Well, and they're Highlanders, and they are
you do
warriors.
what you gotta do.
Yeah.
But anyway, just kind of oh shit.
You're right. Well, and Jayme is this way too. He kills Dougal.
Yeah, he does.
He kills Dougal in cold blood.
Yeah.
And they could have maybe worked it out.
Yeah.
But probably not.
Yeah. And ultimately it's to save his skin and the skin of his people. And that's what he's done this time
Claire.
too.
Yeah. So he does it for the same reason.
But him like doing the whole kind of murder scene thing, I was like, oh, you're smart, but I'm not sure I like seeing this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's see. But Knox's question right before he kills it is, which one of us is righteous? It can't be both. And so with this kind of conversation around sort of the role of God and la 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 la, I thought that was a really, and are we all spiders, and can spiders at cross purposes both be righteous?
There is no righteous, no, not one.
Yeah, I know.
There is none.
Quote from the Bible for those of you who don't know.
Yes, no, not one.
Yeah.
Romans. Yeah, that's it. There is none that are, and so the question is how. And this is a good question for things like Murtagh, is that, you're right. He's not. He's got these issues and he has killed quite a bit. And so does that make them any less worthy of being the hero?
Yeah.
Does that make them any less worthy of being loved? And being that, can people be more complicated than that? And I think that we are seeing a lot of these complications.
Yeah.
And in next season, there will be many, many more complications to that particular theme.
Bless me.
Bless you.
Sorry, I'm fine. We're in isolation. Or actually, technically not, but we're online. I know. I've been doing that the whole time. Yeah, okay, so Murtagh, is Murtagh worthy of being called righteous or not? It's Jayme. Yeah. So Jayme is our hero, and then he, so almost at the opposite side of the spectrum, we set Jayme quite up on a pedestal, and maybe he's not righteous either. And so, yeah, I think that's a really good thing. Or maybe he is. Maybe we all are. So, yeah, I think it's just a really good question. Anything else? I would like to end with Claire's last words, but
okay,
before we do that.
See. Okay, so that's No. I think that's it. I mean, I was just, again, it was so good to see. It was so good to see my friends again, the way I remember them.
Yeah. So it also did occur to me, we started the season and I was like, yeah, I think I'm watching it differently because I'm sort of watching it to do these sort of things. No, it wasn't that.
No, it wasn't that either. I wasn't,
because I was totally absorbed in this episode, just like the old days.
Fast enough on this. I had to stop it and rewind it. I was so excited about this episode. Yeah.
So my lack of excitement isn't about how I'm watching. It's So Claire's final words.
Okay.
God the infinite, God the merciful, God the eternal. Someday I will stand before God and I will receive answers to all my questions about everything in God's universe. She says his. I changed it. And I do have many questions, but I won't ask about the nature of time. I've lived it. So good. So good. So good.
Okay. All
right. So we are, I don't know even what time it is now. 32 minutes. We're probably done. Yeah. But just say, everyone, in these times, go back, watch Outlander while you're in isolation. Really enjoy it. Fall in love with the story again. We're around.
Pick up a book. You can get them
read the books.
Read the books
on Kindle.
And please stay safe.
Yeah, take care of yourselves, everybody. Yeah. We love y'all. We'll see you later on.
Bye.
Bye.